interventions this afternoon would emphasize this. Ours is to welcome you into the Academy, and now I wish to also invite the President of the Academy of Sciences to also add his word of welcome, Professor Van Braun.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Cardinal Turkson, Eminences, Excellency Archbishop Gallagher, Dear Husong Lee, Chair of IPCC, good to interact with you again, sitting behind you. Distinguished ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you in the home of the Pontifical Academies of Sciences and Social Science. A special welcome to the youth sitting left and right from me. I welcome Ana Maria from Ecuador, Emma from Italy, Jatima from India on my left, and Aruna from Senegal. The youth, the young generation's future, is in jeopardy, and they know it. We had a meeting with youth, climate change, and sustainability here with teenagers a few years ago. They have the right to know, and they have the right that our generation acts and does not transfer the risk to them created by climate change and environmental destruction. The Pontifical Academy of Science applauds the Holy See joining the Paris Agreement. This step promises an even stronger role of the Vatican for climate action. It also comes with obligations and commitments for increased attention to climate action by Christian and other religious communities around the world, as already initiated by the Faith and Science Initiative last year, in which we continue to engage. Our academies have held a series of meetings on climate, science, and action over the last 2 decades. Most recently, in June and July this year, we drew attention to the need for accelerated action for climate resilience, and action for the way we design cities. The statement on resilience, supported by a powerful statement of Pope Francis, is before you, distributed in this room. Let me highlight just this, Excellencies and Eminences. Mitigation of climate change is no longer enough. We call for a global effort to build climate resilience. This call is so important as it is the poorest who suffer the most from climate change and have the least contributed to it. This resilience must be based on 3 pillars: mitigation, adaptation, and transformation. I call on you to share this statement with your home countries and constituencies, and I would welcome any feedback from you. We are here to work with you in the future, and we remain committed to the task before us. Thank you again for coming to this meeting. Thank you.
Eminences, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to you all to this event. You've already been welcomed to the Academy by Cardinal Turkson and Professor Van Braun. I welcome you also in the name of the Secretary of State and other organisms of the Holy See and of the Governatarato. I want to begin with a quotation from Psalm 118. Heces dies quam fecit Dominus, exultemus et letemo in ea. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. But this is a day that few of us believed we would ever see here in the Vatican, because the signing of the UN United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Accord at one time in the 2015-2016 seemed a distant and somewhat unrealizable ambition. But we've done it, and we've, in one sense, taken the risk to do it, because it is a big commitment to the international community, to the world, and to future generations. And I'd like to pay tribute, in particular, to the Governatorato and to Cardinal Verghese and his collaborators for the extraordinary effort that has been made to make today possible. We have a long list of people who are going to intervene in this celebration of the accession of the Holy See in the name of the Vatican City State also to this convention. And so we begin most appropriately with some words from His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Cardinal Secretary of State of His Holiness. Thank you, Your Eminence.
Eminences, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to celebrate with you today the entry into force for the Holy See in the name and on behalf of the Vatican City State of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, as well as the Paris Agreement under this convention. With the accession of the Holy See, the UNFCCC almost reaches its universalization with 180 states parties. To achieve this step, an intense and long process of study and analysis was undertaken together with the Governatorato of the Vatican City State. My heartfelt thanks goes to His Eminence Cardinal Fernando Verghese Alzaga, President of the Governatorato, and his team, with whom we have been able to engage with in a very fruitful collaboration. It is also more evident just how many carefully planned environmental management projects are being carried out by its various offices, many of which are mentioned in the book Journeying Towards the Care of Our Common Home, 5 years after Laudato Si, published by the Interdicasterial Working Group of the Holy See on Integral Ecology in 2020. The drafting and editing process of that book was also the result of broad and far-sighted collaboration among many dicasteries of the Roman Curia. The concept of integral ecology, which is central in the Encyclical Laudato Si, calls for stronger collaboration at different levels. Collaboration between disciplines, and we are now being hosted in a place that, par excellence, favors a dialogue between the different sciences, be they natural, social, or human sciences. Collaboration between countries, and we have here many members of the diplomatic corps to the Holy See. Thank you for being here in person and online, and a special thanks to the representatives of Senegal, Fiji, Egypt, and Monaco for being with us today. Collaboration between different components of the international community, states, international organizations, local authorities, the private sector, scientific community, civil society, and collaboration between generations. When we talk about the care for our common home, we should be concerned for the responsible care of those people that are going to live in this, our common home, both now and in the future. Also, for this reason, Pope Francis, as mentioned in the booklet for today's event, announced in 2020 that the Holy See set the goal of reaching net zero emissions, responding at 2 levels. First, the Vatican City State is committed to reducing net emissions to 0 before 2050, through intensifying its efforts to improve its environmental management something it has been working on for a number of years. Second, the Holy See is dedicated to promoting education in integral ecology. Political, technical, and operational measures are not enough. They must be combined with an educational approach that, in particular, addresses young people. This approach will also promote new lifestyles while fostering a cultural model of development and sustainability based on fraternity and cooperation between the human being and the environment. The so-called socio-ecological crisis that we are living is a propitious moment for conversion and for concrete decisions that can no longer be postponed. It calls for an educational process aimed at the integral formation of our conscience. At this particular moment in our history, marked by increasingly warring conflicts which jeopardize the multilateralism needed to consolidate our efforts in favor of integral ecology, an issue like climate change risks being overshadowed. We cannot allow for this to happen. The science is clear, and there is less and less time to tackle or mitigate the effects of climate change and to adapt to it. It has effects that, as we all know very well, have a profound impact not only on nature, but also in the economic, social, and even ethical fields. In other words, climate change is not waiting on us. In this regard, I found the following wish from Laudato Si quite stimulating and empowering, and I quote, "Although the post-industrial period may well be remembered as one of the most irresponsible in history, nonetheless, there is reason to hope that humanity, at the dawn of the 21st century, will be remembered for having generously shouldered its grave responsibility. Indeed, the purpose of today's meeting is also to recognize the critical importance of addressing the serious phenomenon of climate change through a message of hope and courage at this difficult historical juncture. Let us do this by leveraging with conviction and determination the many opportunities offered to humanity for our ecological conversion. I hope that this meeting will help us to sow in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Eminence. We'll now hear from His Eminence Cardinal Fernando Verghese, President of the Governatorato, and his intervention is translated into English among the papers that you have before you. Your Eminence.
Eminenza, Eccellenza, gentili eccellentissimi membri del corpo diplomatico presso la Santa Sede, vi chiedo scusa se non posso parlare in inglese e parlo in italiano, perché purtroppo il mio inglese è sufficiente per parlare con il computer. Comunque, all'interno dello Stato della Città del Vaticano sono stati numerosi ed articolati progetti di gestione ambientale, programmati e realizzati dalle singole direzioni al fine di applicare le indicazioni presenti nella Laudato Si. Il Governatorato dello Stato della Città del Vaticano si è sentito interpellato direttamente dalle sollecitazioni contenute nell'Enciclica, soprattutto quelle del capitolo quinto, alcune linee di orientamento ed azione. In particolare abbiamo voluto applicare, dove possibile, tutti quegli strumenti per rispondere alle sfide climatiche e accogliere l'indicazione di Papa Francesco. Il Pontefice scrive, infatti, che esistono forme di inquinamento che colpiscono quotidianamente le persone perché provocano un ampio spettro gli effetti sulla salute, in particolare dei più poveri. Inoltre, afferma che la terra nostra casa sembra trasformarsi sempre più in un immenso deposito di immondizia. Per evitare che ciò accada, il governatorato ha scelto di adottare tutte le procedure per la raccolta differenziata nelle varie direzioni ed uffici, promuovendo lo smaltimento differenziato sia dei rifiuti normali, organico, carta e materiali ferrosi, sia dei rifiuti speciali pericolosi, per esempio oli esausti, pneumatici, metalli, plastica, batterie, rifiuti ospedalieri. Il governatorato ha anche intrapreso fermamente la strada della razionalizzazione delle risorse, che prevede un nuovo impianto di irrigazione in affidamento che permetterà di modernizzare la rete idrica, inserendo irrigazione in affidamento che permetterà di modernizzare nuove tecniche di gestione, quale per esempio la previsione di annaffiare nelle ore notturne per ottenere un risparmio idrico e un equilibrio in funzione del tipo di coltura. Siamo convinti, come afferma Papa Francesco, che tutti siamo chiamati a prendere coscienza della necessità di cambiamenti di stili di vita, di produzione e di consumo, per combattere il riscaldamento globale e soprattutto la cultura dello scarto. In questo senso, per quanto riguarda l'impegno a ridurre il consumo delle risorse energetiche, sono stati apportati una serie di interventi atti a favorire un maggiore controllo energetico e una diminuzione delle emissioni di anidride carbonica. A tal fine sono state installate diverse tipologie di pannelli solari, impianti di illuminazione con apparati a LED, sensori crepuscolari di illuminamento e di presenza di ultima generazione, che regolano l'intensità della luce a seconda dell'illuminazione naturale della stanza, impostati anche a garantire gli standard definiti dalle norme sulla tutela della sicurezza e della salute dei lavoratori. Sono state anche dismesse le apparecchiature vetuste ed è stato effettuato un rinnovo tecnologico dei network device con sistemi operativi di nuova generazione a minore impatto ambientale. Sono stati implementati sistemi domotici che provvedono, in caso di assenza del personale, allo spegnimento automatico dell'illuminazione presente nelle varie aree operative, oltre a processi manuali di disattivazione dell'organizzazione di elettricità dei locali al termine della giornata lavorativa. Il nostro è un sforzo collettivo a cui ciascuno è chiamato a contribuirvi, cambiando il proprio stile di vita, convinti che il clima è un bene comune di tutti e per tutti. Grazie.
We'll now view a video prepared by the Governatorato for this occasion.
The Vatican city-state has been committed for many years to promoting sustainable development through environmental policies to safeguard the common home and to provide energy-saving strategies. We are committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050 through the use of natural resources, the implementation of projects aimed at energy efficiency, and the upgrade of our technological assets. Sustainable mobility, diversification, and sourcing of cleaner or alternative energy products for transportation, waste disposal, and development of reforestation projects. Advanced engineering projects articulate our environmental and energy policies. The Director of Infrastructure and Services has undertaken a number of initiatives, as well as the Garden and Sanitation Service has also developed mid- and long-term projects to support the environment and biodiversity. The ultimate goal for waste management is to advance the concept of recovery and reuse. For this reason, we study solutions for managing municipal waste, transforming it into energy through environmentally friendly systems, encouraging circular economy, and reducing the use of fossil fuels. The ratification of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreements form the bridge between environmental policies and the Holy Father's declared climate neutrality. Achieving neutrality will require investment in technological facilities by using renewable energy, proceeding to offset emissions produced in one sector by reducing them in another, but above all, by employing natural carbon sinks through reforestation programs and promoting electric and hybrid mobility.
Thank you, Cardinal Verghese, for sharing that video with us this afternoon. Now, via a Zoom link, we are to hear from His Excellency Simon Thiel, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We welcome you, Mr. Executive Secretary. It's been pre-registered, apparently.
I congratulate the Holy See on its accession to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. This is the kind of solidarity and commitment we need to successfully tackle climate change, an existential emergency that is already destroying the lives and livelihoods of people throughout the world. We have a duty to ourselves as human beings that share this planet, moral responsibility to address this massive challenge for which we are responsible. It's an extremely difficult task, but as the stories and traditions of many faiths throughout the world tell us, where there is willingness backed by deeds, by action, nothing is impossible. Last year in Glasgow, at COP26, Pope Francis said, we need both hope and courage. I couldn't agree more. We need hope, courage, deeds, and action to implement transformational change in time to avert a global climate catastrophe. Because we are on the verge of irreversible tipping points that will change our climate, our world, and our lives for the worse forever. The science is indisputable. We only have 8 years to cut emissions by half in order to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So each year, each COP, and all actions between COPs must count. Pope Francis also said the moment has come for a change of direction. COP27 must bring a pivot toward implementation with significant progress in mitigation, adaptation, finance, and support. This calls for leadership, commitment, and adequate investment. In short, we must be more ambitious and we must follow through. Climate change affects us all, every region, every country, every community, every home. Evidence of its destruction is impossible to ignore. Every day in the news, we see nightmare visions from across the globe of rising seas, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and droughts. We still have a chance to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. In fact, we have a chance to create a virtuous cycle that would create a greener, healthier, more prosperous, and resilient world for us all. We know what we need to do to get there, and we have the means to do it. Yet, until now, our collective response has been incremental. But incrementalism is no match for the global climate emergency. We must all do more, and we must do it now. We can't afford any more procrastination or backsliding on our commitments. Parties must come together in a spirit of solidarity to find consensus at COP27. They must step up the pace and ambition of their national plans and financial commitments and follow through. Reaching consensus will not be easy, but if we can't manage to work together, we will all lose out. It's a matter of hope and courage, and also a matter of will. The will to put climate change at the heart of every national agenda, every business, and every investment. Climate change has the greatest impact on the poorest and most vulnerable. Human lives and livelihoods are at stake across the developing world. Helping and supporting nations to adapt and build resilience is both an economic necessity and a commitment to human dignity and to protecting our common home. Investments in transformational climate action will create jobs and stronger, more resilient economies around the world. The economic, social, and environmental return will be immense, and we will all benefit. Thank you for the Holy See's support and Pope Francis's personal commitment to uniting the world around climate action. Let us work together and continue to build positive momentum in the lead up to COP27 and beyond. I thank you.
We're very happy to have with us this afternoon Professor Ho-Seng Lee, who is the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and he's held that role since October 2015, and is currently the endowed chair professor at Korea University Graduate School of Energy and Environment in Seoul, Korea. Professor Lee, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much. I want to extend my sincerest thanks to the Holy See for inviting me to speak today. It's a great honor to be here. Preventing and adapting to climate change is often talked about in terms of technology, decreasing cost and adoption of solar and wind power, for example. Or we discuss the role of politics and economics. But at its heart, climate change is a moral issue, not a technical or political issue. It calls on everyone to work together across communities and nations to solve a problem that now affects every region of the world. It demands that we join in common purpose for the sake of our entire planet and our fellow human beings. It asks all of us to be our brothers and sisters keepers. Pope Francis has been a clear, steady voice about our obligation to care for our planet so that he can care for us and future generations. We are all deeply grateful and indebted to him for his leadership. There are many other issues that also demand our attention. Local and regional conflicts, a wobbling global economy, a tenacious pandemic and persistent poverty, especially in the global south. But none of these problems can be resolved if we don't tackle climate change. Climate change is the salt in the wound, and worsening the other challenges we face. It is aiding the spread of diseases. Vital infrastructure essential to a healthy economy is being compromised. There's even a suggestion that a warming climate could contribute to violent conflict and migration, though at this point these factors are driven by socio-economic conditions. That is why we must not let climate change become overshadowed by all the other challenges we face today. Indeed, it needs to rise, not fall, on our list of priorities. Preventing and adapting to climate change needs to be at the top of the world's to-do list. The Earth temperature has been rising for more than 150 years due solely to human activities, mostly in the form of burning fossil fuels. Even if we stop emitting the greenhouse gases that are warming our planet tomorrow, some changes, such as sea level rise, will continue for hundreds of thousands of years. We have already caused permanent damages. However, we can still avoid the worst impacts of climate change through strong, sustained reductions in the emissions of carbon dioxide emissions and methane and other gases that trap the sun's heat to warm our planet. But we will need powerful and rapid action by government and industry to succeed. If we fail to act forcefully by the end of this century, average global temperatures could rise as much as 5.7 degrees Celsius above their level in the late 19th century. If that does not sound like a lot, consider that the average temperature has risen just 1.1 degree Celsius so far. And yet we are already facing severe consequences, including this year's deadly heat waves and floods around the world. With the ravages of climate change unfolding before our eyes, it is no wonder that a majority of people around the world are concerned about global warming. According to data released last July by the 2021 Lloyd's Register Foundation World Risk Poll, 67% of people viewed climate change as a threat to their country. With this kind of popular consensus, national leaders clearly have a mandate to act. Yet, in my personal experience attending various meetings of global leaders, I have watched with alarm as climate change has been sidelined. These policymakers are smart, well-meaning people, and I have great sympathy for the growing number of complicated problems they are confronting. But they must act against climate change if we are to avoid a future that makes our current problems look trivial. In the process, they can advance domestic agendas that drive economic prosperity and human well-being, while also helping to reduce and ultimately halt the rapid warming that threatens all of us. In November, policymakers will once again have a chance to take this kind of action at the COP in Egypt. With impacts of global warming now bearing down on us, I'm hopeful that we have reached a turning point in which all policymakers and the corporate sector embrace a more forceful response to climate change. Policymakers have a range of options to limit climate change. Among those is a list of options from the recent IPCC findings. It focuses on one of the key elements of a global climate strategy, effective governance. For example, in all countries, more people benefit from emissions reductions, the greater the pace, depth, and breadth of those reductions. Second, ambitious and effective prevention of climate change requires coordination across governments, setting and implementing strategies and building consensus among a variety of stakeholders. And third, and by all means, do not ignore the voices of the world's poorest people and nations. While they have contributed to the least to the climate change, they are already suffering more than their share of consequences, and their insights are critical. Climate change is no longer an abstract threat. It has arrived with a vengeance. Crops and fisheries are failing. Economic damages are mounting. Human health is suffering. unless emissions peak before 2025, just a few years from now, followed by dramatic reductions leading to net zero emissions by the early 2050s, we will fail to limit the temperature rise to the goal of less than 2 degrees Celsius. And we will have ushered in an era characterized not only by the direct impacts of climate change, but by the terrifying upheavals that it aids and abets. Such an outcome would represent one of the greatest moral failures in the history of humankind. Surely, we are better than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your words, and thank you also for traveling to be with us here in Rome this afternoon. Now we are to hear via a virtual link from His Excellency Waoul Al-Boulmagd, Egypt's Special Representative for COP27. He's the President Designate, and he has over 30 years of service in the Egyptian Foreign Ministry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, and allow me at the outset, of course, to join others in congratulating the Holy See on its accession to the Paris Agreement that shows the commitment of the Vatican's city-state to be part of the global action agenda moving forward to address the existential threat of climate change. Also, allow me at the outset to express appreciation for this important Care for Our Common Home initiative, for organizing this event and highlighting ethics and morality as an entry point to discussing the challenges of climate change, which indeed represents the most pressing and indeed existential threat to all of humanity. This perspective is particularly important and resonates strongly with the majority of people around the world who not only witness and observe, but actually experience on a daily basis the manifestations of inequality and injustice in parts of the global response to climate change. Let me demonstrate some of the more glaring aspects of injustice and inequity that we need to contend with. First and foremost, the very fact that those suffering the most today from the negative impacts of climate change are those who have contributed close to nothing to the predicament we are facing, and yet are called upon to contribute to its resolution relying on their own limited resources. Indeed, while it is habitually said that when it comes to climate change, we are all in the same boat, the reality is quite different, as demonstrated by the glaring gap in resilience between countries in the north and those in the south. This means that some of us are confronting this challenge in a resilient, sturdy ship, while others are unfortunately confronting it in an unprotected vessel. Suffice it to say that if you live in the global south, you are 15 times more likely to die as a consequence of climate change compared to if you live in the global north. Another sign of inequity is evident in the availability and the allocation of resources to address mitigation on the one hand, and adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage on the other, since the overwhelming majority of climate finance is directed to emissions reduction, and scarce resources are made available to address the urgent humanitarian needs of vulnerable countries and communities to adapt to climate change. Furthermore, much of the finance available for climate is delivered in the form of loans, with only 6% in the form of grants. In most cases, this would mean that if a developing country is committed to making a contribution to combating climate change, it will most likely further exacerbate their already alarming debt crisis, not to mention forcing many developing countries to divert funds from their national budgets to address their urgent adaptation needs at the expense of essential services such as healthcare, education, and basic infrastructure. For the above and much more, it is essential that policymakers, business leaders, financial institutions, MDBs, and others be aware of these inequities and commit to addressing them and to restoring balance and equity to this process, not only on moral or ethical grounds, but equally important to ensure continued commitment and buy-in by all countries and communities. continued inequity and the prevalence of a sense of injustice could inevitably drive many countries away from prioritizing climate action to the detriment of the global effort. Having said all of the above, the fact remains that the climate challenge will wait for no one, and hence we must act now. We must work together in a non-adversarial manner, and we must move from negotiations to implementation and from pledges and commitments to actions on the ground. This means that we must urgently cut emissions and ensure that the rise in temperature stays well below 2 degrees and that we keep the 1.5 degree target alive. We must ensure food and water security, and we must guarantee fair financing, cleaner energy, and continued technological innovation and availability. Distinguished participants, as incoming COP presidency, we have consistently maintained that now is the time for implementation. Science, as we just heard from the IPCC, unequivocally tells us that there are gaps in mitigation, adaptation, and finance, that we must take practical, impactful action on the ground to start bridging all of these gaps. On mitigation, Egypt has continuously urged all parties to show more ambition through updating their NDCs, and we have led by example and updated our own NDCs. And on the negotiations front, we must deliver at COP27 a solid mitigation work program. On adaptation, we must make meaningful progress on the pledge made in Glasgow to double adaptation finance, and we need to make and capture meaningful progress on the global goal of adaptation. On loss and damage, we are keenly aware of the injustice caused by decades of neglect of this serious issue, and hence we have hosted several rounds of informal consultations aimed at facilitating a universally accepted outcome on this issue, particularly with regard to financing loss and damage. And lastly, we need to address the climate finance conundrum through ensuring availability of highly concessional or grant-based finance to developing countries, while urging MDBs, private investments, and philanthropies to play a larger role to ensure that they be part of the solution. Before concluding, allow me to share what we in Egypt describe as our action agenda for COP27, which is, in a sense, the parallel track to the intergovernmental negotiation. First, we are launching a number of initiatives covering a broad array of climate issues such as food security, water security, and decent life for Africans, waste management, just energy transition, and much more. Second, we also have organized and are hosting 11 thematic days dedicated to the central issues relevant to climate change. These are a day for finance, science, water, energy, decarbonization, adaptation, agriculture, solutions, gender, biodiversity, youth, and civil society. We're also, third, hosting a summit for heads of state and government in an action-oriented format, allowing heads of state and government to participate in various roundtables, which we hope will provide the political momentum needed for impactful, meaningful outcomes at COP27. Distinguished participants, COP27 will take place at a time when the world is witnessing a confluence of global challenges. Most economies are still recovering from the economic and social impacts of a pandemic. Many economies are still contending with slowdowns and recessions. The geopolitical situation as a result of the war in the Ukraine is another seriously complicating factor. Yet, we cannot allow the effort to combat climate change to become a victim of these circumstances, nor should they be used as a pretext or justification to backtrack on past commitments. Instead, we must all realize that time is not on our side, that delaying actions will only make it harder and more expensive in the future. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to stress that we can only succeed in dealing with the climate challenge if we develop and cultivate a sense of trust and mutual understanding. Our effort must cease to be approached as a zero-sum equation. Our collective success depends on every party and every stakeholder feeling confident that their interests, concerns, and priorities are taken on board. No one should feel abandoned nor left behind. We must act, and we must act now. There's no time to waste, and there will be no extra time. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and we look forward to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now we are to listen to a pre-recorded message from Maître Sall Aissat Al, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Senegal, and there is a translation into English of the intervention.
Son Éminence révérendissime cardinal Pietro Parolin, secrétaire d'État de sa sainteté. Son Éminence cardinal Fernando Verghese Alzalga, président du gouvernorat du Vatican. Son Éminence cardinal Peter Alpha Turkson, chancelier des académies pontificales des sciences et des sciences sociales. Son Excellence archevêque Paul Richard Gallagher, secrétaire pour les relations avec les États et les organisations internationales, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs accrédités près le Saint-Siège, chers panélistes, Mesdames et Messieurs. Notre rencontre de ce jour, en ce beau lieu de l'Académie pontificale des sciences sociales, est pour nous une manifestation pacifique de bonne volonté et d'optimisme à un mois du rendez-vous de la COP27 à Sharm el-Sheikh, en Égypte. Il est bien évident qu'à la base de l'adhésion du Saint-Siège à la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques et à l'accord de Paris se trouvent des principes que chacun d'entre nous porte en son sein. Régler efficacement les problèmes que posent les changements climatiques pour l'humanité est notre maison commune. Le Sénégal s'honore des déclarations faites par le Saint-Siège au moment du dépôt de ses instruments d'adhésion aux 10 engagements internationaux. Il en prend bonne note et il en saisit toute la portée. Pour nous qui acceptons de coopérer aux côtés du Saint-Siège dans un multilatéralisme plus ouvert à la défense et à la promotion d'une approche holistique et intégrée, fermement axée sur la dignité humaine et le développement intégral de chaque personne, il s'agit là d'une force de doctrine et de méthode. Qu'il me soit alors permis de vous dire ici et maintenant combien le Sénégal et bien d'autres États africains sont et demeurent pleinement engagés dans l'action climatique mondiale, la résilience des écosystèmes et la conservation de la biodiversité qui offre tant à l'humanité. Pourtant, l'Afrique qui pollue le moins reste le continent le plus vulnérable aux effets du réchauffement climatique. L'engagement de l'Afrique dans l'action climatique se matérialise par le projet de la Grande Muraille Verte que sa sainteté le pape François a qualifié d'excellent exemple de conversion écologique en action. Ce projet ambitionne de planter des arbres tout au long de la bande sahélo-saharienne de Dakar à Djibouti, chaque arbre pouvant séquestrer 80 000 livres de CO2 au cours de sa vie et contribuer ainsi à assurer la sécurité alimentaire. Notre pays, parmi les pionniers de la mise en œuvre de ce projet historique et grandiose, a versé l'année dernière une contribution volontaire de plus de 800 000 $ en appui à l'Agence panafricaine de la Grande Muraille Verte, en plus de ses cotisations statutaires. Et permettez qu'à l'indication de ces actions, j'ajoute l'exhortation de son Excellence Macky Sall, président de la République du Sénégal et président en exercice de l'Union africaine, au financement de l'adaptation et à une transition énergétique juste et équitable qui tienne compte des impératifs de développement d'une Afrique où vivent plus de 600 millions de personnes n'ayant jamais eu accès à l'électricité. Il existe donc un principe élémentaire, presque moral, reposant sur une responsabilité commune mais différenciée en fonction de la capacité de chaque État et sur lequel je voudrais fonder une convergence de vues entre l'Afrique et le Saint-Siège, la justice climatique et l'équité climatique. C'est animé de cet esprit et dans la perspective de la COP27 que le Sénégal, qui assure la présidence de la conférence des ministres africains de l'environnement, a multiplié les consultations régionales autour des priorités telles que le respect des engagements financiers des États riches au profit des pays en développement, l'affectation à l'Afrique d'une partie des obligations vertes et autres investissements innovants. C'est donc ensemble et armés de cette grande bonne volonté dans la mise en œuvre des décisions si avant rappelées que nous irons d'un seul pas à Sharm el-Sheikh pour réussir notre rendez-vous climatique tant attendu. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
And we thank the government of Senegal and its embassy to the Holy See for this message. Now we are going to be linked up, we hope, with the Honorable Ayaz Sayed Fayoum, Attorney General of Fiji. He's also the Minister of Economy, Civil Service and Communications. So we look forward to listening to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Bula Vinakan, a very, very good morning to you, all of you. It's about 3 a.m. here in Fiji. Our collective future stands at a crossroads. The path we choose collectively as nations, states, governments, cities, communities, and individuals will not only be walked with pledges or commitments, but by actions at an international and local scale. Our common home, the planet Earth, is being degraded and fundamentally altered by a tragedy of the commons. Our distorted measures of progress have increasingly come at costs to our planet, our people, and a future that our children cannot afford. Any person of any faith can see that we are destroying the home we've been blessed to achieve and that we have been entrusted to steward. Today, on the cusp of another opportunity to bring the global community together to address this crisis, it is my great honor to recognize this milestone in the history of the UNFCCC. The accession to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement by the Holy See in the name and on behalf of Vatican City State is significant as a unique indication of both the ethical and indeed spiritual solidarity that is being called for in this fight for our lives. When His Holiness released a third encyclical letter in 2020, the world received a wise and compelling message on the ecological and ethical challenges we face. This message is born from faith, but speaks directly to all, irrespective of belief, ethnicity, or nationality. It will remain a message that will become part of our shared history. It will be a message that we will reflect on in the future when we evaluate whether the many voices that echo its meaning the world over have been heard. The ambition and commitment of Vatican City to the principles and objectives of the Paris Agreement are an appeal that extends far beyond the Vatican itself to the fundamental ethics and principles which are a compass bearing for millions around the world. It is the same appeal we make in Fiji, as a vulnerable small island country. If we can make the move to become net zero, the rich world surely can as well. Fiji is a small island state, welcomes the actions of all states in the vision and implementation of the Paris Agreement. This treaty is a treaty of protection for our common home. It is a guiding frame for addressing a crisis which has no single origin or location. The Vatican City State formally included within the parties to this agreement, Fiji welcomes the attention to the value of solidarity that it brings at a time when the hope of many is threatened by the neglect of a few. Through faith in each other and in the commitment to preserving our common home, Fiji has always maintained that we have the strength to overcome challenges that may seem insurmountable. There is no value in delaying action outside of self-enrichment for a selfish few. We must remain laser-focused on the horizon and the safety we know that lies beyond it. Be that as it may, due to the ground we've already lost, literally and figuratively, in the battle to protect our common home, there are and will continue to be losses that we cannot avoid. Loss and damage arising from climate change and the havoc wrought on the environmental integrity to which our lives, cultures, faiths, economies, and prospects have been built is becoming increasingly commonplace. Loss and damage must not be allowed to become endemic and accepted as a residual cost of transition. When adaptation options are exhausted and global mitigation efforts fall short of the localized thresholds and parameters for safety, we must have spaces and resources to develop alternatives and ensure climate change-driven loss and damage does not become the sledgehammer that permanently divides the developed from the developing world. These losses, fueled by inaction of the past and the present, will not be curtailed if steps are not taken collectively today to correct our course. But like an immense ship turning slowly under speed, this course correction cannot yield immediate safety for countries like Fiji. Indeed, in many cases, the changing climate will continue to drive losses to the most vulnerable and damage the building blocks of economic activities and the sources of livelihoods that many have depended on for generations. These losses have never been adequately acknowledged and certainly never addressed. It is a sincere hope that an appeal to the will for equity, that all parties to the UNFCCC take steps in COP27 to provide the necessary financial mechanisms and resources to compensate the communities that have lost the most already to the climate chaos. When Fiji first ratified the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1993, we put our faith in the power of unity and multilateralism. At times, the negotiations have challenged that faith, but with the emergence of the Paris Agreement in 2015, our collective footing has changed, and it is with great respect and appreciation that we welcome the Holy See on the name and on behalf of Vatican City-State into the community that will bring the elements and objectives of the Paris Agreement into full bloom. As we prepare for the next meeting of the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, we are heartened and reassured by the support and commitment of the Holy See and its commitments to help the world's nations bring the dangerous cycles of destruction and indifference to a close. Let us act with a renewed sense of ambition, and let us fulfill not only the promise of Paris, but the promise of shared hope, shared purpose, shared identity, and in keeping with the message and vision of the Holy See, a steadfast commitment to protecting and caring for our common home. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for making an enormous sacrifice to speak to us from the depth of the Pacific night. We hope you get some rest now. Our final link up this afternoon is with Ms. Isabel Rosa Brunetto, who's the Director General of the Department of External Relations and Cooperation of the Principality of Monaco. And so we'd like to listen to you now, Madam Minister. Thank you.
Merci. Monseigneur, Éminence, Excellence, Mesdames et Messieurs, en ce jour important de l'entrée en vigueur de la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur le changement climatique et de l'accord de Paris pour le Saint-Siège, au nom et pour le compte de l'État de la Cité du Vatican, la Principauté de Monaco ne peut que se réjouir de cette adhésion, porteuse d'espoir pour l'instauration d'un nouveau dialogue sur la façon de construire l'avenir de la planète et sur l'action à conduire. Voilà 3 décennies déjà que le GIEC, dont le président est aujourd'hui parmi vous à Rome, nous alerte sur les effets désastreux du changement climatique sur l'environnement et sur les sociétés humaines. Si aujourd'hui son 6e rapport d'évaluation tire une nouvelle fois la sonnette d'alarme en rappelant que les émissions mondiales de gaz à effet de serre devront baisser à partir de 2025, sans quoi il sera impossible de limiter le réchauffement de la planète à 1,5 degré. Il présente aussi des solutions pour réduire ces émissions et limiter les conséquences du changement climatique. En tant que petits États, nous sommes bien conscients que nous ne serons pas en mesure d'assumer seuls la responsabilité de mettre la communauté mondiale sur la trajectoire du 1,5 degré. Mais nous pouvons et nous devons porter un message simple et fort. Face aux plus grands défis de notre temps, chaque voix compte, chaque contribution est importante. Il est un devoir désormais impérieux de chacun de prendre sa part de responsabilité et d'agir en conséquence. Personne ne saurait ignorer les nombreux messages que Sa Sainteté le Pape François a déjà adressés à la communauté mondiale pour l'inviter à prendre soin de ce qui est le bien commun de l'humanité, ni ignorer non plus la profondeur et la force de l'encyclique Laudato Si. De son côté, Son Altesse Sérénissime le Prince Albert II plaide sans relâche pour la préservation de l'environnement. Fidèle à l'engagement de son trisaïeul, le prince Albert Ier, il porte un attachement particulier à la nécessité de préserver l'océan, régulateur du système climatique et berceau de la vie sur Terre. Avec d'autres, sa voix a porté ses fruits dans le cadre des travaux de la Convention, en permettant notamment l'instauration d'un dialogue annuel sur l'océan et, plus généralement, pour l'intégration dans l'agenda 2030 d'un objectif spécifique à l'océan. Ainsi, Monaco, comme le Saint-Siège, n'a qu'une certitude. Les changements nécessaires à la survie de l'humanité ne peuvent qu'être l'œuvre de tous. Il nous faut donc saisir sans atermoiement l'opportunité que nous offre de nouveau la COP27 qui se tiendra le mois prochain afin de porter haut et fort ce message tout en gardant particulièrement présent à l'esprit que si le changement climatique touche toutes les nations sans discrimination, il affecte en particulier et plus durement les plus vulnérables, celles et ceux qui souffrent déjà de la pauvreté, de la faim, et qui n'ont qu'une responsabilité négligeable dans cette crise mondiale. Dans ce cadre, les questions de l'adaptation et des pertes et préjudices qui figureront au cœur des enjeux de cette conférence appellent chacun à de nouvelles ambitions. La Principauté, consciente de son devoir de solidarité, entend assumer sa responsabilité pleine et entière au regard de l'engagement mondial des 100 milliards de dollars annuels pour aider les pays en développement à mettre en œuvre l'accord de Paris. Soulignons qu'une part importante des projets que nous soutenons dans nos pays de coopération en Afrique sont des pays à co-bénéfice climat, c'est-à-dire qu'ils contribuent à l'adaptation et au renforcement de la résilience des populations les plus vulnérables. Ces préoccupations d'intérêt majeur ne doivent pas nous conduire à négliger le nécessaire renforcement des mesures d'atténuation. La Principauté s'est engagée à réduire de 55% ses émissions de gaz à effet de serre d'ici 2030 et d'atteindre la neutralité carbone en 2050. Pour ce faire, seule une transformation profonde de nos modèles de société sera efficace. De fait, la conversion écologique, pour reprendre les termes mêmes de sa sainteté le pape François, implique nécessairement un changement de paradigme. Lors de la COP est prévue la première table ronde de haut niveau sur l'ambition pré-2030 en matière d'atténuation. Gageons qu'elle permettra de réorienter la trajectoire afin que nous tenions collectivement les objectifs de l'accord de Paris. Monaco, qui continuera d'avancer de façon résolue, est persuadé que le Saint-Siège, notamment par la portée du message universel qu'il délivre, contribuera grandement à cette nécessaire refondation. Notre destinée commune ne pouvant se concevoir sans mise en œuvre d'une solidarité exemplaire. L'ambition que porte Monaco pour la COP27 est claire. Face à, je cite, la grandeur, l'urgence et la beauté du défi qui se présente à nous, comme évoqué dans l'encyclique Laudato Si, il nous faut enfin tous avoir l'audace du bien commun. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Director General. And now we are very happy to have with us this afternoon His Eminence Cardinal Michael Czerny, Prefect of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and His Eminence will also present a video for the occasion which has been prepared by the Dicastery. Thank you, Your Eminence.
Thank you very much. Your Eminences, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Today is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. Today is the final day of the season of creation in 2022. Today is the Holy See's official entry into the landmark Paris Agreement of 2015. And today we have premieres of a short video at the end of my remarks and a major new film this evening. The global situation is more desperate today than it was 7 years ago. Despite the Paris Agreement, its target of only 1.5 degrees temperature increase is practically out of reach. The planet is already 1.2 degrees hotter. Yet many new fossil fuel projects are recklessly being initiated, contradicting the call from the International Energy Agency. That's why the proposed fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is essential to complement the Paris Agreement and help implement it. At the same time, 7 years after its publication, the Encyclical Laudato Si continues to inspire and guide people of goodwill towards an ever more integral ecological approach based on a culture of encounter, expressing respect for the gifts of the earth, and together effectively taking care of them. Our dicastery supports every effort of connecting, gathering, and sharing the voices of civil society. The Laudato Si Action Platform is a multi-year initiative sponsored by the dicastery and led by the Laudato Si movement. The Encyclical establishes practical goals, while the platform organizes stakeholders in various sectors, common spaces for sharing concerns, discernment, and commitment. Registrations are encouraging. There are currently over 6,000 participants, with families and schools accounting for the largest number, followed by religious communities, civil organizations, and parishes. The platform is active across 6 continents, with representation largest in Europe and North America, followed by South America, then Asia and Africa. The platform, an instrument at the service of local churches, is a place of communion, as Fratelli Tutti calls for. This evening is the premiere showing of The Letter, a feature documentary film highlighting humanity's capacity and responsibility to stop the ecological crisis. It has been produced in partnership with the Laudato Si movement, the Dicastery for Communication, and the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. In this film, Pope Francis is in dialogue with new voices, unheard until now. With us here are Ridhima Pandey from India, age 14, and Aruna Kandi from Senegal, age 24, protagonists of the film. Millions of young people like them around the globe are urging us, particularly adults in positions of economic, political, and cultural responsibility, to undergo ecological conversion and get moving. Recent climate catastrophes, such as the apocalyptic floods submerging 1/3 of Pakistan, displacing over 30 million people, continue reminding us that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are becoming increasingly desperate. Pope Francis insists, we must also accept the universal ethical principle, however unpopular, that damages must be repaired. This is a universal ethical principle. Damage must be repaired. This important issue promises to be central and very difficult at COP27 in Egypt this November. We have to embrace harmony with the environment and the earth, pleads the Holy Father, whatever spheres of life we inhabit. We cannot just wait until the next international summit, which might be too late. The earth burns today, and today we must change at all levels. Now let me conclude by introducing Care of Our Common Home, the Voice of Civil Society, a video produced by the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development in collaboration with the Dicastery for Communication. In this urgent call to action, the Holy Father reminds us that we each have a part to play, whoever and wherever we may be, in changing the collective response to the care of our common home.
abbiamo richiamato la necessità di adoperarci responsabilmente a favore della cultura della cura. Tutti noi, è bene ripeterlo, chiunque e ovunque siamo, possiamo avere un ruolo nel modificare la nostra risposta collettiva alla minaccia senza precedenti del cambiamento climatico e del degrado della nostra casa comune.
The Church of Divine Mercy of Sungai Ara in Penang is green because we live Laudato Si. We have a green parish policy that calls for waste reduction. We preach for don't waste food, and we also go paperless with things. We do not support consumerism. We try not to buy anything, but look for used items. If we really need to buy, we will buy local, which has no carbon footprint.
Rinnovo allora il mio appello. Prendiamoci cura della nostra madre terra. Vinciamo la tentazione dell'egoismo che ci rende predatori delle risorse. Coltiviamo il rispetto per i doni della terra, della creazione. Inauguriamo uno stile di vita e una società finalmente ecosostenibili.
Con base a lo anterior, hemos desarrollado una alta gama de proyectos en torno al cuidado del medio ambiente. Logramos la siembra de más de 6.500 árboles en cerca de 15 hectáreas de terreno, aquí en nuestra casa en Ciudad Don Bosco, lo que permite tener una mejor concentración de gases de efecto invernadero, mejorando la calidad del aire para todo el Valle de la Aburrá y en especial para la ciudad de Medellín. También hemos logrado con esto mejorar la captación y las microcuencas de agua que bajan por la montaña. Y adicional a ello, hemos montado una planta de tratamiento de agua, lo que permite tener un manejo más eficiente y un menor desperdicio de agua.
Abbiamo bisogno perciò di un nuovo approccio ecologico, un'ecologia umana integrale, che coinvolge non solo le questioni ambientali, ma l'uomo nella sua totalità. Diventa capace di ascoltare il grido dei poveri ed essere fermento per una nuova società.
Con il termine fattoria sociale o agricoltura sociale intendiamo tutte quelle attività legate alla terra che incorporano al loro interno persone svantaggiate, fragili e disabili. Sono dei luoghi dove lo spazio e il tempo diventano inclusione e dignità, creando dei processi occupazionali basati sulle abilità dei ragazzi. Il concetto è: cura la terra ti curerà, rispetta la terra e la terra ti rispetterà.
Dalle mani di Dio abbiamo ricevuto un giardino. Ai nostri figli non possiamo lasciare un deserto.
I'm the project coordinator for DREAM, run by the community of Sant'Egidio, where we are working with people living with HIV/AIDS. This project was begun toward the end of the 1990s. We are working with these people to create gardens that are practicing organic farming. In these gardens, we are encouraging farmers to grow vegetables that are chemical-free. Chemical-free because we have seen a lot of side effects that are coming from pesticides and chemical fertilizers.
Preghiamo affinché i vertici COP27 e 15 dell'ONU possano unire la famiglia umana nell'affrontare decisamente la doppia crisi del clima e della riduzione della biodiversità.
Thank you, Your Eminence, and thanks to you and your collaborators at the Dicastery and thanks also, obviously, to the Dicastery for Communication. We, ladies and gentlemen, Your Eminences, Excellencies, we are almost at the end of this event, but I want to say most sincerely that your presence this afternoon, which is really the vast majority of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, is very encouraging to us. It would have been remiss not to commemorate this occasion of the 4th of October when we entered into these agreements. I mean, it's also important to remember it's 1 year since we had a very successful event here with scientists and religious leaders as well. A lot has happened in 12 months, as we know all too well. But your presence here this afternoon is very important to us, and I thank you most sincerely. Our meeting has made clear the various reasons why the Holy See decided to accede to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and to the Paris Agreement in the name and on behalf of the Vatican City State. I would briefly like to mention some of the reasons. First, there was a need to be coherent with the social teaching of the Catholic Church, which is quite clear on the complex issue of integral ecology. It was equally important that we share the international responsibility and commitment to address climate change, a serious and urgent problem to tackle now and in the future. And I think, as also many of us felt, it was important to be coherent in the face of our young people to what the Holy Father has been preaching for so many years, that we should translate that also into a commitment by the Holy See and the Vatican City State. Secondly, we see it as a way to strengthen multilateralism in the current critical situation in which we all live. Indeed, the Climate Forum is an important political and policy space with a certain shared vision. It could be summarized in the following way: either we win together or we lose together. This fact should be at the core of multilateralism. Thirdly, being part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and to the Paris Agreement will not only support the Vatican City State in its journey towards climate neutrality, but also allow the Holy See to take a more active role and involve itself with even more determination in the work of the COPs. Last November, COP26, was held in Glasgow. Notwithstanding it could have been more courageous, we must not undervalue some important aspects that emerged from the Glasgow conference, such as the adoption of various important collective and not just individual commitments in the area of forests, methane, coal, and transport. The near conclusion of the Paris Agreement's rulebook, which has lived a long and complex gestation period. The consensus around limiting global warming to 1.5% Celsius compared to pre-industrial level. The decision to accelerate efforts towards the phase down and unabated coal power and phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, as well as to intensify the development of clean energy and energy efficiency. The increased attention given to the problem of loss and damage, although still insufficient compared to the real damage that climate change is causing in the most vulnerable countries. The even stronger participation and contribution of civil society, which shows that this process is not only top-down, but also bottom-up. We must admit that the road to achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreements is complex, and the time available to us is proving to be less and less. There is still a lot to do. Let us not underestimate, for example, the growing and worrying phenomenon of those refugees and migrants being displaced by climate change. In many cases, they lack access to international protection, and as the number of severe climate events increases, so will their need for concrete solutions, including in the areas of adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. For that reason, the steps that will be taken around and during COP27, to be held in Sharm el-Sheikh in just over a month, will be even more significant. Many are already calling this the African COP. Our attention should be focused not only on rapidly closing existing mitigation, adaptation, financing gaps, but also on the issues of loss and damage, as requested by many vulnerable countries. This is an issue of fairness, justice, and equity, not only for Africa. It will have consequences in every country, as we can see every year more. Here I'd like to emphasize that care for our common home means fostering a culture of care and putting an end to the throwaway culture that dominates our society and yet is so evidently unsustainable. And this I call personally a climate ascetic, which we need to discuss. This sobering challenge requires the collaboration of everyone, as so many of us recognized during the event on faith and science towards COP26, which was hosted by the Vatican with the cooperation of the UK and Italy exactly 1 year ago today, and with the involvement of numerous religious leaders and scientists. The Holy See is always more committed to moving forward in this journey together with you for the sake of the common good and of humankind, both today and tomorrow. Before closing, I want to express a special thanks to the Pontifical Academies, to the Protocol Office of the Secretariat of State, to the Governatorato, and in particular amongst my colleagues, to Dottoressa Francesca Di Giovanni, whose onomastico it is today, and to Dr. Paolo Conversi for their tremendous efforts and work in these last weeks. I conclude by simply saying, Laudato si, mi signore.